Welcome, everybody. It's great to see some people here tonight. We're here to kick off our 2021 Becoming series featuring Andy Cockburn here tonight. And so the series is here to answer your career questions around the energy efficiency sector. So what work is available? How do I get started? Is this job the job for me? And so today, Andy's going to be sharing his own story. And at the end, he's also around to answer all of your questions about becoming a carpenter or anything else. He's got a lot of really interesting experiences. So if anything jumps out and you want to learn more, then ask your questions. And to get some housekeeping information out of the way, the event is recorded, so you'll be able to review the information later if you miss anything. And all of our past events are recorded as well. So if you want to look back and there's any other jobs you're interested in, it's a great resource. Questions are welcome. And that's part of, I'd say that's half of why we're here, is just to ask and answer some questions. So I just ask that you save your questions for the end. You can either use the Q&A tool, which is at the bottom of your screen, or if you raise your hand, then I can unmute you and you can ask your question out loud. Everyone's friendly here, so no need to be shy. If you put your questions in the chat box, I will try to get to them, but your safer bet is to put them in the Q&A box where I'll definitely see them. And tonight we're going to have a hard stop at 5:45. So you'll be free to go and have some dinner or have lunch, or depending on where you are in Canada or in the world, maybe go grab a beer, whatever you want to do, it all works. And so just to set the stage a little bit, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about Andy and then pass the mic over to him. So Andy Cockburn is a Red Seal General Carpenter and a certified passive house consultant with a broad range of site and shop experience in custom housing, heavy timber framing, stairs, design, and restoration. His career interests have led him to work in commercial radio, in marketing, in trades, teaching, and nonprofits. And his most recent position is as Director of Education and Training with NAIMA Canada. So he's got a lot to teach you, a lot to tell you about. And so I'm going to pass it over to you, Andy. Take it away.
Great. Thanks, Kirsten, and thanks to Efficiency Canada for inviting me in tonight. I'm, like Kirsten said, I'm Andy Cockburn, and I'm from NAIMA Canada. And I'd like to tell you about the journey of where I am today and how I got here. Though I've been wearing a suit for some of the times that I'm at work, most of the time I'm dressed just like now, and I'm not quite in this moody sort of lighting, but I've been able to wear all sorts of hats and all sorts of different facial hair arrangements as well. Kristen, if you could give me control of the... Oh, there we go. Thank you. So let's start at the start. What is a carpenter? Carpenter, the etymology of carpenter comes from the Latin carpenterius, which means chariot builder. And I have yet to build any chariots, but a lot of the time that I've spent in carpentry has been pretty much in the modern interpretation of what carpentry is. Someone who works in construction, in component fabrication, maybe like concrete formwork, or in woodworking, like in cabinetry. And carpenters will mainly work with wood, but that might mean lumber, that might mean like heavy timber, that might mean finishing types of wood. But we also get into metals, plastics, insulation, roofing, siding, and lots of other materials that we get to put our hands on. And a lot of the times, at least these days, unless you're into a specialty shop, you're in buildings. And I've spent a lot of time in buildings as a carpenter. This is what I really wanted to be. When I was in high school, I wanted to be a hippie. I thought that was going to be the best thing that I could possibly be. I was in a band. I was into reading and art and girls, and I even went to a few protests to fill out my hippie lifestyle. But the job prospects, obviously, are not very promising. And with current follicle challenge right now, I couldn't grow my hair long enough to get into the proper hippie status. But one thing that was constant throughout my youth was drawing. I would draw and doodle almost all the time. And when I reached high school, I started drafting classes. So drafting is basically technical drawing. And I took those drafting classes alongside my art classes, and any drawing or drafting that we were doing was manual with pencils and pens, rulers, templates. We would use these contraptions called drafting machines, which were kind of like if you have one of those gooseneck lamps that's on a spring-loaded arm. That's what a drafting machine was. Um, Anything resembling computer programs like CAD was still a few years out. There were really early, like a computer as big as a room versions of CAD back then, but anything like we have today was non-existent. I didn't know at the time, but the drafting and art and woodworking classes I was taking were lodging stuff into my subconscious. How to measure, how to interpret scales, how to be accurate, adding, subtracting, lettering, and paying attention to details. All of that stuff was being ingested. So toward the end of high school, I was set on the idea of becoming an architect. Now, all of for my first year of post-secondary schooling, I was accepted into the architectural technology program at Algonquin in Ottawa, and this was downtown along the canal at the old Colonel By campus, which is now a high school, if I'm not mistaken. And I'd already been living on my own for a year or two. College was a big step in adult responsibility and just moving up in the world. The workload was heavier than I expected, and I was experiencing the first real critique of my work. The drawing here that you see on the screen was a 1-point perspective for design class, and it had to be in monochrome color. So I decided I was going to use coffee for my monochrome color, and I stayed up all night drinking instant coffee all night long while painting with it. And so to this day, I can't touch instant coffee just because I have gut rot left over from all that time. And of course, a funny story. I was up all night doing this, and the day that it was due, it was in the middle of winter in Ottawa, and I was riding OC Transpo, and I had this thing half in a plastic bag, and I dropped it face down onto the walkway of the bus where there was all this slush, and of course my instructor picked that up, but it figures. Everything that we did were pencil first and pen on vellum paper, and then transferred to blueprints with a Diazzo machine. I can still smell the ammonia from the transfer process. The original drawing had to be super clean, no smudges or mistakes, or else the blueprint would come out cloudy. And I was not so clean at that time, so I got a lot of smudges and stuff on my drawings. As I look back, I see that I was already learning about double wall construction and energy efficiency through built assemblies. I enjoyed that process of placing all the pieces correctly on the page and learning the terminology for all the different layers. I see that I was putting together assemblies on paper that I would later build in my 20s and 30s. I also see my professor was desperately trying to tell me that I needed to work on my improving my drawing layout, and that's apparent through all the black marks on the page. My head was elsewhere for much of this, as many 18-year-olds can attest, and I know now. I was busy daydreaming out the window. The horticulture students were always doing something cool beside the school, and I should have been paying attention in drawing and math, but I wasn't at that time, and so I got a big shock. Well, not so big shock. I keep this transcript in my portfolio as a reminder of where I was and who I was back then. And you can see for that second semester, this is my first year, that second semester was pretty much turfed with the exception of English. I'm proud to say, I'm proud to point out that I passed English. That string of F's, though, was just a result of my immaturity at that time, my inability to focus on schooling. The black and red marker scrawls on my drawings had only reached the part of my brain that was riddled with self-doubt and insecurities at that time. It skipped past the part that could assess and correct those mistakes. And it certainly wasn't my first failure, but it was my first adult failure. It made me change a lot of plans for my schooling career, and I'm thankful that at least I was able to have the cognizance to go and get some help in charting a new path. But taking something away from it, what did I learn? I learned the importance of of listening, um, and how important it is to focus, how much energy it takes to listen and to pay attention to details. Um, I learned that I could fail and still carry on. Um, I did recognize some of my strengths, that I did have a good mechanical, spatial, visual acuity. I could picture stuff in my head and translate that to a page. I just needed to work on the actual neatness and quality and making sure that that was going upwards instead of staying stagnant. And admit sometimes hard stuff happens, and so that teaches you about resilience and patience, and I had to be patient with myself. So 180-degree turn. I decided I was going down a completely different path for a little while, and I went through the radio broadcasting program at Algonquin in Ottawa, and it renewed my sense of self-worth. Also, there was no homework. This program, it led me to a career after graduating. I had a career in commercial radio, writing copy, assisting with promotions, voicing commercials, and even doing a couple of shows. I had an on-air shift in the evening, and then I did a morning show for a little bit, and I did a drive show or afternoon show. And I was fortunate to work at chains in Ottawa and in Kingston with a lot of great people who are still friends to this day. It was a great way to grow up, too, because it's a young person's industry, and you get to live off free t-shirts and movie passes. But again, what did I learn? I, I, I got a really good sense of business, how client relations work, and what a $20,000, what a $50,000, and $100,000 contract looks like in the world of advertising and marketing. I learned how to clearly and meaningfully communicate. There's a real sense of knowing what to say and when to say it and how many words to use. And I won't kid you, I'm reading off a script right now, and I learned that that really does make a difference in terms of meaningful communications. I was working with deadlines too, for the first time, actually meeting, working to heavy workloads with deadlines. And then eventually I became a manager, and I was managing a department of writers and a production department. And so that really taught me about how being a boss, and not even so much of a boss as much as somebody who is supporting and pushing people forward and getting the best out of the department. And then the value of being prepared, of making sure that all your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed. That's where I first started learning that. And I had some good managers who told me at that time, you know, get your stuff together, in not so nice terms. But it really helped. It helped to hear that from somebody who was more experienced. It taught me so much about sales, about marketing, and about being good with people, and a lot of the skill sets I still use today. A little over 5 years into my radio career, I decided to make a shift again. I went back into school, and I went to carpentry. I went to a program called Heritage Carpentry and Millwork at a small branch of the Algonquin campus, southwest of Ottawa, in a town called Perth. For 2 years, I learned about woodworking and carpentry, restoration techniques, general construction, and some soft skills training. It was certainly a boost for my person and for my academics as well. I graduated with honors, and I won the academic award for excellence. It was a real pick me up. That's what I needed at that time, I think. My third try at schooling, it was one of the best I've ever had, honestly. It was demonstrating to me that if I put my heart to it, I could succeed in almost anything. However, this was also a period of upheaval. My new wife and I were moving to a small town from the big city. It was very different, learning a new set of skills and language, and learning to be more honest with myself and with others. It wasn't as manipulative as I would have said doing something like marketing or writing commercials. You're not trying to convince someone of something because your work is on display. And sometimes it was really tough, and I would make choices that weren't the best for me, and that didn't pan out, or I just learned some hard lessons. I'm glad that I changed from that time, and I'm equally grateful for the rough patches that brought me down a couple of steps on the humility ladder. I got to do some great stuff in the schooling, and I'm glad I did it, and it was a real life change for me. And as the millennium turned over, I was working in the industry and learning more. I was meeting a lot of new people, different than anyone that I had ever met before and ever worked with before. An important lesson that I learned early on was that everything and everyone is your teacher if you're willing to listen and learn. And sometimes I had absolutely fantastic carpenters to learn from. People who had either hired me or who were working with me, who would give me advice, tell me how to do certain things, tell me to watch what I was doing. And sometimes I even had people who were giving me bad advice, who weren't treating me well, or who just had a chip on their shoulder and were doling it out to everybody. But everything is a learning experience, and even the bad experiences are learning experiences. And so you learn what you want to do, and you learn what you don't want to do. And I tried to take that all in as much as I can. Plus, I was trying to put my hands on a lot of different things, a lot of different projects. One of the best jobs I had was with a small timber framing company near Kingston, Ontario. Here I was able to apply skills that I had learned in my early years of drafting and my new skills in carpentry. And I was fortunate to be able to be part of some cool projects. Like at the top right there, it's an outdoor chapel with the timber framing company, and then you can see some timber trusses which I built for an addition in the Kingston area. Another job, I was working with a window maker, and this is great. Fantastic little shop with a couple of old guys, and we were cutting glass and putting putty in and restoring these old windows. And it turns out we were restoring the windows for the town hall in Perth, which is kind of a nice way to honk your horn a little bit. And the work was absolutely delightful, quiet, cutting glass and working with warm putty that's like bread dough in your hands. I was also building stairs for a while. And this was a fantastic job that really confirmed my skill set. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. It was in Ottawa on the industrial part of the Maryville Road region. And I was working in a gigantic warehouse that was all stairs, railings, stair parts, fabricating pieces of stairs, and all the different pieces for railings, plus the shipping part of it as well. So during that time, I was able to do a lot of stairs, about 50 or 60 sets of stairs, and mostly for American clients. So you'd get stairs that were just for a normal house and some that were for gigantic mansions. It proved to me that I had a decent skill set, that was kind of nice too. Reflecting back on those early years as a carpenter, I realized that that broad set of skills that carpenters need to have, I was slowly building those things up, like the ability to problem solve, how to read a tape measure and use it effectively, how to use all the tools and not be afraid of the tools, because some of them are basically for cutting meat, and using those tools you have to be on your toes. To perform layout and calculation, of doing the multitude of tasks where you need to be accurate. Working methodically as well, of setting things up so that you're doing all of one task and you're going through and repeating, and then you move on to the next, and you set this up so that you're able to complete jobs effectively on time and with a little bit of efficiency of motion and of strength. How to communicate and how to listen was also another one, because inevitably you're yelling instructions or measurements to other people across the shop environment or a site, and it's loud, and you have to be willing to communicate and willing to listen. Working safely was huge, of knowing don't climb up there without a harness on, or don't point that air gun towards yourself, that sort of thing. Which brings about the idea of working with others, how to get along with people, how to work cooperatively, but also being able to do stuff by yourself, that if you needed to work alone, then you could. Reading plans and interpreting instructions, and being aware of what's going on around you. The strength and flexibility part. This is something that I'll get into in a little bit, but you've got to be flexible and you have to be strong. Um, and I didn't learn this until my late 30s, but yoga is incredibly helpful. If you can start doing yoga in your early years and keep doing it, it really does help. It keeps you limber. You learn about so many other things on site. You learn about from others and from what you watch and what you get to do, and that all boils down to practicing and doing things over and over and over again. There's no replacement for experience. On almost every job, there's no replacement for experience. With carpentry, it's no different. And what the heck? Sometimes you get to draw on skills that you thought you'd left behind. I was able to pick up a lot of jobs because I was pretty good with a drafting table. This house on the right hand side that you see, I drew that in pencil and ink, and then a computer designer took it and changed it into this pamphlet that the timber frame company was using. So taking something into a marketing sort of venue and having it like a sales brochure was pretty cool, and it brought back those drafting skills that I thought that I don't know that I would ever get to use them again, but I did, which was nice. Uh, and then sometimes you get surrounded by beautiful landscapes, and it's enough to make you think you got the best job in the world. I took part in repairing this barn that you see in the background there, uh, and most days I was awestruck just by the wind blowing through the grass in the fields around. It was just like being in a storybook, as one of my coworkers mentioned while we were working. And then horses running by. It was a horse farm. This lady who was teaching people how to ride horses, and she had a whole bunch of different animals. So there were cows, there were horses, and there was even mini donkeys. And I participated in most of the repair of this barn. So lifting the end of the barn up that you can see here in the photo, we lifted the end up, put a new foundation under it. I built some doors and windows for it, repaired some timbers up high and down low. And then one day I even had the chance to chase some mini donkeys around the field that had gotten out of their pens. It wasn't part of my job, but I did it. It was it was something I'm going to tell my grandkids, I think. My career in carpentry has seen me do work within 100 kilometers of my home, and I've worked for a lot of different companies. I've worked in custom housing. I've worked in cabinetry kind of shops. I've worked in shops where I was working in traditional timber framing and using a lot of hand tools and power tools and 500-pound timbers that would come in, and we would move them around the shop with all sorts of different gizmos. I ended up working with a company, DAC International, which I know we in some of the meetings that I've been in of late, DAC and some of the people that I used to work with are now mentioned and still in the business and still designing systems for retrofitting buildings, which at the time I didn't know much about what I was doing other than building houses in panels for clients around the world. I flew down into the States, down into an area called Easton, Maryland, around the Chesapeake, and oversaw some houses going up down there. It was an amazing experience, but also something that later I would get to teach. As I was working with all these companies, I was aiming towards my Red Seal. I went about it in such a way that I was working as a journey person. So I didn't go through a formal apprenticeship, my 2 years in college, and then going out into the real world to actually get the experience and do a lot of different jobs. It's a little bit more difficult that way, but it's similar kind of end. I had to have 7,200 hours of work experience. I had to have schooling that showed me the basics, the fundamentals of carpentry and building and the math and the safety and everything that goes along with that. You then had to apply, and I made up my portfolio and tons of pictures of my work and reference letters. All told, it was about 6 months worth of work to actually get to the point where I was ready to apply, sit down with one of the representatives at the Ministry of Training, Colleges and Universities, and apply to write a 3-hour exam. And which I'm happy to say in 2007 I wrote it and I passed it. And then now I'm a Red Seal General Carpenter, which basically means that I've attained that level of certification and can work throughout Canada now. Especially if a job has it as a prerequisite of employment, I could work anywhere. And what have I learned as a carpenter? And I'm talking about those years where I was actually out in the field or out in the shop and working as a carpenter. Critical thing that I learned was an enormous respect for trades workers. When people say that there's a difference between blue collar and white collar work, they're not kidding. But I think at one time I used to think that a blue collar work would be somehow beneath me in terms of that cerebral capacity, and I was totally wrong. The people that I have met in the trades are some of the smartest, some of the most organized, some of the most critical thinking, some of the most kind people, and some people who as they seem silent, maybe even standoffish, that are thinking, and they've got business sense. So the respect that I have for the people that I've worked with is just enormous. And again, I think that I've made so many friends in the trades who are still friends to this day, and I'm so glad for it. It reinforced my knowledge of communicating, paying attention to measurements in detail and being safe, and taking a plan out to built element, which was sometimes a challenge because you had to ask tons of questions about what did you mean here? This dimension isn't correct, and working with not only being in a shop, but then having to take off all your shop equipment, walk into an office full of CAD operators, and say this dimension doesn't make sense with this. Somebody who knows computers and knows programs may not necessarily know how a roof goes together, and so you had to have that communication sense and the ability to communicate in different venues. My math got a lot sharper, and I would often ask for help with my math, but a lot of times I was either adding on the fly or doing calculations or adding up multiples of lengths of something or other, and you get good with math. You especially get used to using fractions because, like it or not, a lot of the construction that's still being done out there is done in imperial and is done with feet and inches. As much as it'd be nice to work in metric, they still sell 2x4s and 4x8 sheets of plywood. I learned how to install multitudes of layers, insulation, air tightness. I was very lucky to learn about how things worked in that way, why you put insulation in cavities, and how to do continuous insulation, how to do a good job of installing vapor barriers and air barriers, and how to make it so that when two of these elements touch, that they are tight and it's consistent and you've got really good joints, and that you are covering off all those little details like windowsills and seams. That kind of knowledge came over years of actually doing it, and I'm glad I had that knowledge because it does play into what I'm doing these days as well. I also got to play to my strengths and use my skills. And you have to do that as a carpenter because a lot of times you're being asked to do many things at one time. And nobody can do the whole multitasking thing really. You're doing a lot of one thing and just doing a lot of one thing one after the other, but making sure that you're playing to your strengths. For me, it was drawing, communicating, and being able to work well with others. An unfortunate thing I learned was that I have a couple of crushed vertebrae in my back, and that helped me make some payments on my chiropractor's yacht, which I wouldn't want to have to do very very long, but still up to it. I realized that I had something in me in that communication. I think somebody else did too, because I was in my early 30s, and one of my old college teachers called up and said, would I be interested in teaching a class? Um, so I jumped at the chance. I started with an architectural history course, and it was amazing. I held on to that course for about 15 years and loved teaching it every year. And um, it soon led to other courses that I got to teach. And so I was teaching part time while I was working in the trades, and I was teaching everything from shop classes to drafting to math to safety and architectural history, and then eventually it turned into a full time job. Full time job opened up in 2007 with a new program called Construction Carpentry Advanced Housing, and so it's this conglomeration of all the skill set coming together. The program was um, teaching people how to build super efficient houses. So my role and what I had to do, and I was teaching mostly first years and getting them into the idea of how to build houses with the fundamentals, but planting those seeds and talking about drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, for super efficiency. And why are we building this way? Why do we have to have houses that can perform well? And I loved seeing light bulbs go on, and I enjoyed my teaching incredibly. It was such a wonderful experience to to be in a classroom, to be able to use the skills that I had developed over years, but to show someone else how how to do it, how to be a carpenter. I've heard people say, and you've probably heard this too, those who can do and those who can't teach, and ha 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 ha, yeah, hardy har har. But I've since read the actual phrase is, and this is a bit of Schadenfreude, um, those who can do, those who know teach. And that being said, I've never learned so much about being a carpenter as when I was being a teacher. Not only did I have to get used to being in front of the classroom, but I learned how to be a support for my students and how to exercise patience with others, and especially about the value of second chances. Because there was times where I was dealing with people who were at the end of their rope, people crying to you in your office because they couldn't handle the stress, and or people who just needed that extra boost in their confidence. They needed somebody to tell them, yeah, you're doing this right, yeah, keep going, or hey, maybe you need to course correct. And that, to me, was an incredible learning experience. I never knew how much I knew about carpentry until I started teaching somebody else. And on the other side of that coin, my students taught me more than I would ever have been able to learn on my own. Uh, Keeping on that path, as I was teaching, I was able to join my local home builders association as a representative of the college. And this turned into a valuable connection in industry that has introduced me to more excellent people that are still part of this group today, and I have immense respect for. And as the years went by, I was elected to be their vice president and their president. And then in 2018, this led me to a job with the Canadian Home Builders Association National Office in Ottawa. The time was right, and I picked up, dusted off my suits, and I left teaching, and I went into nonprofits. And so I worked with people from all across Canada. I was very lucky to meet so many great people who were also in builders associations, just like the one I was in, and asked them and talked to them about what kind of training they were looking for, what kind of education they were looking at. And I loved that experience of being able to meet so many different people and relate my experience as well. This brought me to where I am today, and I am so thankful for where I am today. I'm the education and training director at NAIMA Canada, and it's one of the best jobs I've ever had. The team I work with is absolutely fantastic. A group of positive, proactive, and visionary people. I love working with this group. and I feel like I'm actually using all of the skills I've developed. Uh, who'd have thunk that a carpenter could be doing the job that I'm doing today and enjoying it and succeeding with it? I have never felt as fulfilled uh, in work as I do right now in doing what I'm doing. So to sum up this journey, um, I have learned so many different things as a carpenter and as a radio guy and as a teacher and as a nonprofit worker. Um, I learned an enthusiasm and a confidence about the trade. I can speak well with others, and hold my own in a room full of carpenters and engineers, or in a group of policy people, which is really kind of nice. I like that feeling, and my respect for my peers and my willingness to learn hasn't gone away. That's one of the things I enjoy so much about what I'm doing right now. And most importantly, this has taught me so much about the value of being able to laugh, you know, uh, how to support other people and how to be patient, and also how to be good enough for myself. Um, I realize that I've gone through a lot of different hats and a lot of different careers, uh, and it's great. I love it. And I don't think I would turn around and go back and change very much if I had the opportunity. Um, Thank you very much for listening today. I'm glad that I had the chance to come in and tell my story. Thank you, and if there's any questions, anybody wants to chat, I'm happy to do that too.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. It was really cool to hear your story and just hear your honesty. I think sometimes people want to paint the story as only successes. And so I think it's awesome to hear, I failed and I kept going and it worked out. So thanks for
Yeah,
sharing that.
yeah, my pleasure.
Awesome. And so we do have lots of time for questions. We've got about 10 minutes here. So if you have a question, you can put it in the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen, or use the chat. And we also have some questions that were submitted ahead of time. So I'll start with those. And if anybody thinks of anything, drop it in the Q&A and I'll keep an eye out. And so one of the questions asked in advance, and it's something I've been curious about too, is can I get started as a carpenter without a degree? So do you need that college training, or is it something that you can get started on through an apprenticeship, or are there other paths?
Yeah, I mean, you could go and start working on a site tomorrow if without any credentials, but like anything, it does help to have some background, whether it's college, whether it's apprenticeship, or a degree. Um, I've met a lot of people uh, whose families have been fortunate enough to be able to um, bring them into their companies. Whether it's a mom and pop operation where they're building houses and they're doing 5 or 10 houses a year, and they just grew up with it. Um, but I've also seen um, people that have come out of, they did a degree in poli sci and wanted to be outside more, and so they came and started carpentry with zero on their experience. Um, Getting into the trade is certainly easier if you have some experience, if you have some credentials behind you, but it's not impossible. And these days, more than ever, uh, the the capacity to get into trades. I mean, there's schools now that are offering trades training for free. So I, if people out there are thinking, I don't have any experience in trades, uh, take a night course. Do Go to Home Depot and buy one of those build your own birdhouse kits and see how that turns out. But you can start from nothing. It will be a bit of a steep learning curve, but I mean that's what a lot of these programs are for, especially apprenticing and in college trade specific training. They're there to teach you how to do it, and so yes, get into it, do it.
Awesome. That's super helpful. And another question is, do I need special skills or special training if I want to work on energy efficiency projects? If I wanted to build a passive home, do I need additional training, or how do I go about that?
Yeah, you need to, and this is something that I think is of value to people that are perhaps, if we have people online who have done degrees in science or engineering or architecture, um, the trade of carpentry, um, is multifaceted. That there's design work, there's the actual trades work where you're building stuff, there's the orchestrating, the management part of it, of site supers, but there's also the part that has to do with building science. And this is not necessarily something that is anything new. It's been around since the late 70s, since the oil crisis of the 1970s, where all of a sudden North American buildings had to become more efficient. The 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 way of doing this, of making sure you're doing it correctly, you do have to have at least a working knowledge of some of the concepts that come with basic building science, like how heat, air, and moisture move in a building, why it's important to have air tightness, how the built assembly can contribute to energy efficiency, is of ultimate importance to carpenters. And I would encourage anyone to go and do their net zero training. I did my passive house training. I'm a certified passive house consultant, and it was one of the most valuable things I think I've learned in the last 10 years. It really was enlightening to be able to know that, yeah, the built environment or the built process can contribute greatly to the efficiency of buildings. And so I think any kind of extra training that you can do, if you are already interested in science, if you're interested in physics, that helps a lot. Um, and there is no real better lab than to work on a building and work to a model to actually try to achieve a targeted performance of kilowatt hours per meter squared, and you're aiming for that in a certain air tightness and a certain R value, and dealing with all the different components and making it all work. That is the ultimate science project, I think.
Awesome, thanks. I think it's a, it can sound a bit intimidating at first hearing these terms, but there's so much training out there for people. So great answer. Great to hear. We've got a question
Thank you.
here from Frank, and so he's asking, how are you trying to integrate PHI training into the other high performance training or basic Red Seal carpentry? Is there a difference? Should there be? How long until there's not? My caveat with this is I'm hoping you know what PHI is referring to in this question. I'm not familiar with the acronym there. Do you know, Andy?
If he's talking about Passive House, or the Passive House Institute out of Darmstadt, Germany, um, in personally, when I'm working on doing the things that I'm doing now and creating online learning content, I'm always cognizant of what's in the background. How can we aim this towards the the ultimate in terms of performance for buildings? If passive house concepts, I think I'm a little biased just because I've gone through and I've eaten that lunch, and I'm full of it. That I think that working passive house and net zero energy concepts into modern building is an absolute must. And modern carpenters, modern home builders, modern people who are in the trades period have to be uh, they have to be up on that language, and they have to be cognizant that they're aiming for a target. Whether you are just the framer, or whether you are doing the insulation, or whether you're in charge of installing windows and doors, or you're the person doing drywall, you have to be able to think big picture about not piercing the envelope and creating leaks. So yes, I agree 100% that the high performance building concepts should be a part of modern training for everyone from carpenters, plumbers, electricians, all the way up to engineers and architects. It should be a mandatory training that anybody takes, uh, so that you can get that picture. And guaranteed, as it did for me, it was like a smack your head moment of realization that these concepts actually make sense, that they are what we should be doing. And I don't think I can state it any more plainly than that.
Perfect. And we've got time for one more question, but if you can answer it in 30 seconds. So this is
Sure.
going to be your
Yep.
challenge.
Yeah. Yeah.
So from Andrew here, he's wondering, You mentioned retrofits, noting the importance of retrofits in lowering emissions. So does each building require a unique plan to make it more efficient, or is there one or two broad solutions that you think, in your experience in carpentry and in working on buildings, that could be implemented across a large number of buildings?
I hope so. That I hope that there's only a few solutions. I think that there's going to be more so a need for details, many details, so that a carpenter or a contractor, renovation contractor, can work out those details with as much efficiency as possible. Ideally, the situation is to take the building back to as close to new as possible and build out from there. But I think that we will be, at least initially, dealing with one offs for a little while until we figure out a system that's going to work on a broad scale. And believe me, I'm working on it.
Awesome. Yeah, I think hopefully we see some big and exciting changes in the next little while. And there are some other questions here. They're really important questions. We just we're running out of time here at 5:45. So Andy's email is there, and I'm sure he is super happy to continue these conversations and answer those questions. And yeah, so
Yes.
thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Andy, for sharing your stories and your expertise. Next month, we are going to be learning from Will Gonnell, he works in home construction. He's got a really interesting story. So if you're looking for more information on the trades and that kind of work, definitely join us next month. And otherwise, thanks everyone for coming, and enjoy the rest of your evening.